The year is 2010. La Liga has never looked brighter, and yet never been so divided. At the heart of Spain, two empires were preparing for battle. On one side, Barcelona, led by a philosopher disguised as a coach, Pep Guardiola. And on the other, Real Madrid, led by a conqueror disguised as a tactician, José Mourinho. Barcelona had already redefined what football could look like. In just 2 years, Guardiola's team had become a kind of symphony, with each pass a musical note, each movement a melody. They didn't just win matches, they hypnotized you while making it look effortless. By 2010, they'd won 8 major trophies in 2 seasons. They were the closest thing football had ever seen to perfection. Xavi, Iniesta, Busquets, Messi, names that spoke the same language. Together, they made tiki-taka a religion. And Pep, he was its prophet, calm, poised, ruthless in precision. A man who believed that football was about beauty and perfection, not chaos, about control, not violence. But across Spain, Florentino Perez, president of Real Madrid, was watching and seething. He'd built Galacticos once before, Zidane, Ronaldo, Beckham, but Frank Rijkaard's Barca team made his empire less than dominant. This was the same thing Pep's Barcelona did to him. He had made his new empire look outdated, and Perez's ego wasn't built to tolerate inferiority. So in 2009, he launched Operation Renaissance. And then came the final piece, José Mourinho. The special one, the man who had just conquered Europe with Inter Milan by defeating Pep's Barcelona in the Champions League semi-final. A genius who believed football wasn't meant to be beautiful, it was meant to be won. Mourinho arrived in Madrid like a storm. He was cocky, theatrical, unpredictable, and he was of all things a master of mind games. To the Madrid faithful, he was a savior. To Barcelona, he was a heretic, the one who stood in defiance of their perfect rhythm. This wasn't just football anymore, it was philosophy versus philosophy. Guardiola's Barcelona played football like chess, slow, calculated, death by 1,000 passes. Mourinho's Madrid played it like poker. Unpredictable, explosive, and psychological. For years, Spain had been accustomed to rivalry. But this was an ideological war. The media called it El Clásico, reloaded. The players could feel it in training. Even the fans, families divided between red and white, felt it in their bones. Because everyone knew the match at the Camp Nou on November 29, 2010, wouldn't just decide who led the table, it would decide who ruled football itself. In the days leading up to the match, Madrid was loud, confident, electric. Mourinho had been in Spain for only a few months, but he'd already conquered the press. He called Guardiola's football boring and predictable. He told fans, "If Barcelona play in paradise, then we'll bring them back to hell." It was classic Mourinho. Brilliant, provocative, psychological. He wanted Barcelona to feel pressure long before the whistle blew. Guardiola, as usual, refused to engage. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just another match. This was a test, not of tactics, but of faith. Could purity survive the storm? The world tuned in. Over 500 million people across 200 countries are prepared to watch. A rivalry that had lasted for decades was about to enter its most dangerous chapter yet. November 28th, the night before the match. Barcelona's city centre was silent, almost unnervingly so. Across Spain, at Madrid's hotel, Mourinho was equally ready with his team. To him, this wasn't a game, it was a statement. He had come to Spain to dethrone a god. And he believed he could do it. But destiny had other plans. Because in less than 24 hours, the world would witness not a match, and football itself would never be the same again. Nearly 100,000 fans were at Camp Nou, with their flags waving like fire, chants echoing through the cold November air. The banners read, "Som un equipe de somni." We are a team of dreams. Mourinho walked out first, head high, suit pressed sharp. He'd been here before. He'd beaten Guardiola's Barcelona with Inter just months earlier. And now he was back, with Real Madrid behind him, ready to prove he could do it again. He looked around the stadium, smiled slightly. He thrived on this, the booze, the hatred, the theatre of it all. But beneath that smirk was a flicker of unease. Because this time, he wasn't the hunter. From the very first minute, it was chaos, elegant chaos. Barcelona moved like water. Madrid chased like men drowning in it. Every pass cut through Madrid's shape like a knife. Xavi dictated tempo. Iniesta slipped through spaces that didn't exist. And Messi, not even scoring yet, controlled the game like a puppeteer. Then, in the 10th minute, things began to unravel. A deflected ball fell to Xavi. He took one touch, waited, and then, with a flick of the boot, chipped it over Casillas. 1-0. The Camp Nou erupted. Xavi didn't even celebrate wildly. He just smiled. The kind of smile that says, "We're only getting started." 15 minutes later, it was déjà vu. Pedro tapped in from close range after another dizzying passing sequence. 2-0. And the look on Mourinho's face said everything. Not anger, not shock, just disbelief. His team wasn't just losing. They were being unmade. Every time Madrid tried to counter, Busquets stole the ball back. Every time they pressed, Piqué dribbled past them like a midfielder. Even Ronaldo, usually unstoppable, looked powerless. Mourinho had built his Madrid to fight, to intimidate. But against this Barcelona, brute force didn't matter. They weren't playing football, they were painting it. And then came the third. David Villa, the new arrival, timing his run to perfection. Messi threaded a pass so delicate it could have cut glass. Villa finished. 3-0. By half-time, Real Madrid weren't playing, they were surviving. Even the fans in white scarves started clapping Barcelona's movement, not out of respect, but surrender. In the second half, Madrid didn't just fall apart, they lost control. Ramos, Alonso, Pepe, players built on pride, started lashing out. Frustration turned into fouls, fouls into chaos. Guardiola stood calmly on the touchline, hands folded. Mourinho barked orders, but there was nothing they could do. Barca were just too good tactically. Mourinho looked helpless, the conductor of an orchestra gone tone deaf. But it wasn't over in the 55th minute. Villa again. Another Messi assist, another perfect finish. 4-0. The Camp Nou shook. Mourinho turned away from the pitch, lips tight, eyes blank. And then came the final blow. Jeffren, the academy kid, bundled in the 5th goal in stoppage time. 5-0. No mercy, no resistance, just silence from the away end, the kind that only follows humiliation. As the referee blew the whistle, the scoreboard glared like a wound. 5-0. Real Madrid's worst defeat in half a century. Mourinho's heaviest loss in his managerial career. Barcelona didn't just win, they stripped Madrid bare, in their own theatre, under the world's gaze. The fans chanted, "Mo, vete al teatro, Mourinho, go to the theatre," mocking his drama, his arrogance, his aura of invincibility. And as he walked down the tunnel, he whispered to himself, almost as if to say, "Enjoy this. It won't last forever." Because even he knew humiliation like this never fades quietly. That night didn't end a rivalry. It lit a fire that would soon consume them both. The morning after the 5-0, Madrid woke up in mourning. Newspapers called it La vergüenza del siglo, the shame of the century. TV pundits said Barcelona didn't just beat Madrid, they rewrote the rules of football. The Santiago Bernabeu was quiet that day, unnaturally so. Players avoided the press, heads down, phones off. Inside the training ground, Mourinho walked past every camera without saying a word. For a man who lived off chaos, he was still. But inside, he was burning. That night hadn't just hurt his reputation, it had violated his identity. He had been the special one, the tactical god who stopped Barcelona with Inter, the man who'd beaten Pep before. Now, he was the villain in someone else's masterpiece. And Mourinho was never built to play second to anyone. So Mourinho did what he always did. When cornered, he declared war. "We'll never lose like that again," he told his players in private. "If they want beauty, we'll give them chaos." Training sessions changed. Tactics shifted from expression to suppression. He studied Barcelona's rhythm like a scientist studying a virus, looking for weaknesses, patterns, triggers. If Guardiola believed in control, Mourinho believed in disruption. If Pep saw football as art, Jose saw it as combat. He wasn't trying to beat Barcelona at their game anymore. He was going to destroy their game. The transformation wasn't just tactical, it was psychological warfare. Mourinho started planting seeds everywhere, in the media, in referees' minds, even in Barcelona's dressing room through his words. Every press conference became a grenade. He questioned refereeing bias. He accused the league of protecting Barcelona. He called Pep a man who complains too much for someone who wins everything. And Pep? He refused to respond, at first. He tried to keep the purity of his football intact, but Mourinho was dragging him into the mud, and everyone could see it. Madrid became meaner, tackles were harder, fouls became tools. Pepe, Ramos and Alonso became soldiers of a new doctrine, one Mourinho himself had forged. If you can't outplay them, outlast them. If you can't outlast them, outfight them. Behind the scenes, Cristiano Ronaldo was changing too. No longer just a winger dancing on the touchline, Mourinho transformed him into a weapon. Sharper, colder, angrier. Ronaldo stopped smiling after goals. He stopped celebrating assists. He became a machine. Mourinho told him, "You're not here to enjoy football. You're here to kill doubt." By the spring of 2011, a storm was brewing. Madrid were no longer a team chasing Barcelona. They were a team chasing vengeance. Mourinho began targeting moments, not matches. He knew revenge wouldn't come from one game. It had to come from many. And fate seemed to agree. Because soon, football would hand him something unprecedented. 4 Clásicos in 18 days. Copa del Rey final, 2 Champions League semi-finals, and a Super Copa to top it all off. 4 battles, 4 chances to settle the score. 4 chapters that would turn football's greatest rivalry into open war. Mourinho smiled when the fixtures came out. He looked at his staff and said quietly, "Now, we fight on every front." Night, no more beauty, no more philosophy, just blood, belief, and revenge. What followed would not be about tactics, it would be about violence, pride, and survival. Because in the span of 18 days, the world would watch football's most beautiful rivalry descend into madness, and Mourinho would make sure everyone remembered who started it. April 2011. Spain was holding its breath. For the first time in history, Barcelona and Real Madrid were set to face each other 4 times in just 18 days. Not friendlies, not exhibitions. 4 matches, 4 fronts. 4 chances for pride, revenge, and ruin. The atmosphere was poisonous. Every news outlet had picked a side. Barcelona's Mezquion club, philosophy versus Madrid's iron-fisted realism. Pep's purity versus Mourinho's provocation. Nobody doubted one thing. Something would break before this was over. Whether it was Pep, Jose, or Spanish football itself. The first stage was set for the Copa del Rey final at the Mestalla Stadium, Valencia. Mourinho knew he couldn't lose this one. Not again. Not after the 5-0 humiliation. From kickoff, Madrid's plan was clear. Press, tackle, suffocate. They weren't playing football, they were dragging Barcelona into a fight. and for the first time, it worked. Ronaldo, who'd spent the previous Clásicos frustrated and isolated, looked reborn. Mourinho, for the first time in Ronaldo's career, shifted him to the middle of the pitch, to play as a striker. He ran like a man possessed, chasing every ball, colliding with every defender. At the other end, Puyol, Busquets, and Alves looked rattled. Barcelona's passing rhythm was gone. 120 minutes of football came, and no goals occurred between them. Then, in extra time, the moment that changed everything. Di Maria broke free down the left. A perfect cross. Ronaldo rose, as if pulled by gravity in reverse, and thundered a header past Pinto. 1-0. Madrid erupted. Ronaldo tore off his shirt, screaming at the crowd. For the first time in years, Madrid had beaten Barcelona. And Mourinho? He didn't smile. He simply raised one finger, his reminder that this was only the beginning. 7 days later, the war moved to the Bernabeu. Champions League semi-final, a ticket to Wembley, and immortality. From the first whistle, the tone, just like the match a few days prior, was venomous. Pepe lunged at Dani Alves. Alves rolled, screamed, clutched his shin. Red card. Mourinho exploded on the touchline. He was sent off too. He stormed down the tunnel, shouting to the cameras, "Why?" Always the same. Always then. From that moment onward, Messi happened to Madrid. He took care of business as usual. 2 goals, one a blur of movement and balance so perfect it felt like a painting. He danced past 5 white shirts and slid the ball into the net with surgical calm. The Bernabeu fell silent. Even Madrid fans knew they had just seen something divine. Barcelona won 2-0. And in that silence, Mourinho began his next battle, not on the pitch, but in the press room. After the match, Mourinho sat down at the table, eyes dark, voice low. Then came one of the most infamous rants in football history. Why? Why does a great team like Barcelona need this help? Why can't they win clean? Why? He accused UEFA, referees, even football itself of being biased. It wasn't just deflection, it was manipulation. He was turning every setback into a siege. Madrid against the world. And the fans believed him. Within days, Spanish football wasn't united anymore. It was divided into tribes. You were either with Mourinho or against him. August 2011. Supercopa. By August, the war had gone beyond repair. In the Spanish Supercopa, Madrid and Barcelona clashed again, and this time, there was no restraint. Elbows, pushes, shoves. Ramos on Messi, Busquets on Pepe. Bench-clearing fights. Then came the infamous moment that defined the ugliness of it all. A touchline scuffle broke out between staff members. And in the chaos, Mourinho reached out and poked Tito Villanova, Pep's assistant, in the eye. The world froze. Cameras zoomed in. Replays looped endlessly. It wasn't football anymore. It was psychological and physical warfare televised. Pep stood motionless, watching, jaw clenched. He didn't shout, didn't react, but his silence said everything. He was done. After the Supercopa, nothing felt the same. Friendships between national teammates shattered. Casillas stopped talking to Piqué. Ramos refused to shake hands with Busquets. Spain's golden generation was tearing itself apart, all because of 2 men and their ideologies. But for Mourinho, this was victory. He'd made Guardiola angry, emotional, human. He'd dragged him down from the clouds and into the dirt. And that's where Mourinho always thrived. Still, deep down, Pep knew something Mourinho didn't. You can win battles through hate, but hate consumes its own army. The war had reached its peak. But the toll was coming. Because in the next chapter, the same obsession that fueled greatness would begin to destroy it. When rivalry became religion, by 2012, Spain wasn't just split between 2 football clubs, It was divided into two faiths. Every cafe, newsroom, and family dinner table had turned into a battleground. You were either with Guardiola's Barcelona or Mourinho's Madrid, and there was no middle ground. This wasn't a rivalry anymore. It was identity versus rebellion. Catalonia's cry for independence echoed through the Camp Nou, while Madrid stood as the symbol of the state, the establishment, the empire. Football was no longer just sport, it was politics wearing boots. The players felt it too. On international duty with Spain, teammates barely spoke to one another. Casillas and Piqué, once brothers in red, stopped exchanging words. Sergio Ramos and Busquets clashed over club loyalties. Even Vicente del Bosque, the national team coach, admitted, "The real fight isn't between players, it's between ideologies." And at the heart of it all were two men who refused to blink. Mourinho had turned the Spanish media into his playground. Every week, his press conferences were headline material. He didn't just speak, he provoked. He accused referees of favoritism, called Barcelona actors, and painted himself as the martyr of fairness. The phrase, "they protect Barca," became a national echo. And whether it was true didn't matter, it was believable. Under Mourinho, Real Madrid became a movement, a rebellion against the perfection that Barcelona represented. Ramos, Pepe, and Coentrão embodied that spirit. Tackles came harder, elbows flew higher. Every Clásico was a brawl disguised as football. Barcelona, on the other hand, refused to stoop, at least at first. But even Pep's men began to crack. Busquets mocked opponents. Alves exaggerated contact. The purity of tiki-taka was now stained with theatrical survival. Football had become theatre, and the villains and heroes swapped masks every week. By late 2011, Spain's most watched event had turned into its most controversial. Red cards became expected. Referees trembled before every whistle. Even FIFA stepped in, urging both clubs to restore the image of the sport. But how do you restore something that's already shattered? The 2011-12 season brought moments of brilliance, but always with an undertone of rage. When Messi scored, he didn't smile, he glared. When Ronaldo scored, he didn't celebrate, he screamed. Both men had been dragged into their manager's war, and their greatness began to feed on hatred instead of joy. In one match at the Bernabeu, after another brutal tackle from Pepe, Guardiola turned to his bench and said quietly, "They're not here to play, they're here to destroy." And yet, even then, Barcelona couldn't escape. Mourinho's mind games were working. Every touch, every pass, every gesture from Pep now carried tension. The man who once preached calm now shouted on the touchline. The philosopher had become the fighter. Mourinho had finally dragged him into the mud, and that was victory enough. But even in triumph, there was poison in the air. Madrid had won the battle, but football had lost something much greater. By 2012, the war had burned too long. Barcelona was still beautiful, but beauty alone doesn't survive fire. The team that once played football like poetry was now moving on muscle memory. Pep Guardiola looked exhausted, not from the matches, but from the noise. Every press conference had become a psychological duel, every Clásico a moral debate. He'd built the greatest footballing machine of the modern age, and yet, the joy that once fueled it was gone. He admitted in one interview, "I'm empty. I've given everything I have to give." He walked away after the 2011-12 season, not defeated, but drained. And in that moment, Spain realised something. The philosopher of football had reached his limit. But across the country, Mourinho was smiling, not because Pep had left, but because his plan had worked. He'd broken the illusion of invincibility. He'd turned artists into warriors, and warriors into mortals. That season, Real Madrid finished with 100 points and 121 goals, records that still stand to date. Mourinho had conquered Spain, but somewhere deep down, he knew he'd also lost something in the process. Because wars don't end when one side wins. They end when both sides collapse. Even in victory, Madrid's dressing room began to fracture. The very fire Mourinho had ignited now burned him too. He'd created soldiers, not friends. Casillas began to question his methods. Ramos resisted his tactics. Players complained about the constant hostility, the siege mentality that had once fueled them, now exhausting them. The same us against the world mindset that made them champions was now turning inward. By the end of 2013, Mourinho's empire was cracking. The same press that once adored his charisma now called him toxic. Even his greatest ally, Cristiano Ronaldo, began to distance himself. Madrid was winning matches, but losing its soul. And for all his tactical genius, Mourinho's legacy in Spain was no longer about trophies. It was about turmoil. Two departures, two very different goodbyes. Pep Guardiola left quietly, with tears and applause, his players carrying him off like a general who'd fought for beauty. Mourinho left amid controversy, anger, and division, a general who'd fought for dominance. Yet both left as revolutionaries. They didn't just change Spanish football, they changed football itself. Pep's Barcelona inspired a generation of teams, from Klopp's Dortmund to Arteta's Arsenal, who believed in beauty, patience, and purpose. Mourinho's Madrid, on the other hand, influenced another kind of generation, pragmatic, disciplined, defiant. They proved that control could be broken, that perfection could be cracked. Together, they didn't just compete, they defined what football would become. Because every modern rivalry, Klopp versus Guardiola, Tuchel versus Pep, even Simeone versus the world, carries the DNA of that war. It wasn't about two teams, it was about two ideas. But legacies always come with losses. Spain's golden generation, the one that had dominated world football, began to fracture under the weight of club rivalry. The unity that had won the 2010 World Cup faded as bitterness grew. By the time Pep and Mourinho left, something in Spanish football died with them. And maybe that's the true cost of greatness, that it consumes everything, even the beauty that created it. Years later, when both men faced each other again in England, something had changed. The fire was smaller, but the respect was bigger. They no longer saw enemies, they saw reflections. Each had something the other lacked. Pep had purity. Mourinho had resilience. Pep built empires through belief. Mourinho built them through battle. Together, they built an era that will never be repeated. Football was never the same after Pep and Mourinho, because they didn't just fight for victory, they fought for philosophy. And in that war, the game itself was reborn,